Namaste, namaskaram, vanakkam, namo namaha, Jai Ganesh. Please visit our website at classicalyoga.org, and if you'd like, subscribe to our podcasts. The 8 broken limbs of yoga. Obviously, throughout history, there have been innumerable religious spiritual figures who have taught their intimate students. Most of these never left any written record of these teachings. Even the most famous of them, like the Buddha, for example, and Yeshua, the Jewish rabbi, who was later had his name changed to Jesus the Christian, they too never left any written record of their teachings. This obviously leaves open the door for tremendous misinterpretations, to say the least. However, there are also those who left written records of their teachings. And unfortunately, these too are often completely distorted and perverted beyond recognition by perhaps those with little true understanding or those with an agenda to create their own cultic organizations, for example. One of these religious spiritual figures, whose teachings have been completely distorted almost beyond recognition, was the Saiva Hindu guru Patanjali, who wrote the classic Yoga Sutras, also known as the Yoga Darshana, sometimes the Raja Yoga of Patanjali, or classical yoga. Now, before we go into depth about who Patanjali was and what he taught and who he taught, let's look at today's so-called Ashtanga Yoga. This large movement was created through a distortion of Patanjali's Yoga Sutras, in which there is this very small part which he calls the Ashtanga Yoga portion. These are the 8 limbs, Ashtanga, of the yoga practice. And in these 8 limbs, there is absolutely no mention of any specific Hatha Yoga Asana, meaning a Hatha Yoga posture, a physical posture. But bizarrely, this is exactly what the modern so-called Ashtanga Yoga is all about. And how did this come about? Like the condition of the Hindu Yoga Dharma today, which is completely distorted in many ways, due to weak Indian Hindus. Some of them don't even want to be called Hindus. And then their subsequent students who further diluted the original teachings. One really has to look back to Krishnamacharya, who was born in, I believe, 1888. And he was the court yogi, that should tell you something right there, of the Raja of Mysore. Now, apparently, Krishnamacharya was a highly educated man and a very competent Hatha yogi. However, as we will see, he lacked the courage and conviction to really stand up for the Hindu Yoga Dharma. In the early 1900s, a dancer, Eugenia Peterson, went to India, and in her trip to India, she heard about Krishnamacharya, and she desired to learn some Hatha Yoga. So she went to Krishnamacharya and asked if he would teach her, and he blatantly said no. Probably because she was not a Hindu, but also because she was a woman. It was traditional for men to teach men and women to teach women. However, Eugenia Peterson was not satisfied with this. And right from the get-go, we see what has happened to our distorted yogas of today. She whined to the Raja of Mysore, and obviously he capitulated to this non-Indian, non-Hindu woman. And so he told his court yogi, Krishnamacharya, you must teach her. And so he did. And the rest is history. So Eugenia Peterson, who now called herself Indra Devi, went to America, and specifically to what actually is the land of phony yoga, California, Hollywood. And she began teaching the elite of Hollywood, the stars of the day, this Hatha Yoga. And here we see the seeds of today's modern spurious yoga and the total distortion of the Saiva Hindu guru Patanjali and his classic Yoga Sutras. Another infamous Indian man who came to America and brought his Hatha Yoga was the infamous Bikram Choudhury. And actually, the records show that in the beginning, he kept the Hindu connection, and he offered his classes on a donation basis only, which is the true way to teach any aspect of a religion. However, he soon attracted the Hollywood elites also, and specifically Shirley MacLaine, who told Bikram, basically, look, if you keep using the word Hindu and you don't charge for these classes, people will have no respect and they won't come. So, true to the capitulating Indian man, which we have far too many of, he acquiesced, and the rest is history. We had the massive movement of Mik Yoga, or Hot Yoga, which ultimately ended in total disaster, sexual and financial scandals. At this moment, Bikram is out of the country, doing who knows what. So back to Krishnamacharya, he also spawned several famous or infamous, depending on how you look at it, disciples. One of them was Iyengar. And actually, according to Iyengar, when he was ready to publish his book, Light on Yoga, which is, in a sense, a classic of Hatha Yoga asanas, and does still contain a lot of the Hindu dharma there, without the obvious recognition that this is all about the Hindu dharma. There are many pictures of Iyengar throughout the book, and it is said that his guru, Krishnamacharya, told him not to publish this book, not to show himself off in such a way. But the apple didn't fall far from the tree, and Iyengar ignored his guru and published this book anyway. Desikachar and Joyce, two other infamous, quote, gurus, unquote, from the Krishnamacharya line, who further watered down one specific aspect of Hinduism, Hatha Yoga, into simply an exercise routine. And in the case of Pratabi Joyce, or Put Your Hands on Me Joyce, he also was responsible for the, again, further distortion of Patanjali's Yoga Sutras and the Ashtanga Yoga of today, which has spawned its yoga stars like Eddie Stern and Kino. And so we have the so-called Ashtanga Yoga of today, which is mainly focusing on the physical body, and yet they also incorporate the Ashtanga Yoga portion of the Yoga Sutras. But here too, we'll see that this has been completely distorted to suit their agenda. So remember that real yoga is all about the Hindu dharma, Hinduism, the Hindu religion. And remember that yoga simply means to yoke to one's Atmana, soul, and soul source, Brahman. Yuj Atman Brahman Cha. And the various real yogas are the means by which Hindus achieve this Atma Darshana, or soul realization. Karma Yoga, Bhakti Yoga, Raja Yoga, Jnana Yoga, Hatha Yoga, Mantra Yoga, Japa Yoga, Nada Yoga, Natha Yoga, Kundalini Yoga. And the yoga of today is most often utilizing what should be called Hatha Yoga, the Hindu devotional postures. Some keep a quasi-spirituality, as they would call it. Others make it just pure exercise routine. Others pay lip service to Patanjali. Whatever the case may be, this is really the story of today's modern yoga, which started with not admitting that this was Hindu dharma and teaching students who were interested in studying the Hindu yoga dharma and qualifying them to actually be authentic teachers of the Hindu yoga dharma. And remember that of all the classic Hindu yogas, Hatha Yoga was the one that the rishis said to keep secret. And that's because it does deal with the physical body and esoteric areas like the chakras and kundalini. And they knew that this would be abused and distorted, which is exactly what's happened today in the name of yoga, Astanga yoga, and all of the other nonsense in the name of Hindu yoga. So who was the Saiva Hindu guru Patanjali? And how do we know that he was a Hindu and a Saiva Hindu? Well, take it for what it's worth, but the story of his incarnation is that on the spirit plane, he was Sesha, the couch, the snake of Vishnu as Ananta. And one day, feeling Vishnu move in a rhythmic pattern, Sesha asked Vishnu, or Ananta, "Why are you moving like this?" Vishnu said, "Because I am watching Nataraja dance." Remember, Harihara Ekarupa Gunashila. Saivas and Vaishnavas are brothers. So Sesha said, "Oh, if I could only be born with human eyes, that I could also witness this great dance." One day, a devout Hindu woman was taking her morning ritual bath, and she scooped up some water, and in the water was a little snake. She took the snake home. She was barren of child. And she raised the snake, who became Patanjali, her son. And to this day, images of Patanjali depict him as the lower half a snake and the upper half a boy. Now, take the story for what it's worth. But the facts are that as a young man, Patanjali gravitated towards the Chidambaram Nataraj Siva temple in Tamil Nadu, which to the Saiva Hindus is considered the center of the universe. And it was there that he, along with 300 other Brahmins, witnessed Shiva as Nataraja actually dance before them. And to this day, that is a home of Bharatnatyam, of the classical Hindu dance, wherein the dancers always pay obeisance to Siva Nataraja, the divine dancer. And anyone who's been to this village of Chidambaram and this sacred mandir feels the power of this place. And there, depicted on the walls in murals, is the story of Patanjali's birth. So the very reason for his birth was to be fully devoted to Siva Nataraja. Obviously, 2,000 years ago, when all of this took place, there was only Hindu dharma. Patanjali, of course, knew nothing of the monotheistic religions. And we do know that his guru was Tirunandi. Tiru is a very common prefix in South Indian Tamil land, meaning holy. Tirunandi, holy Nandi. And he was one of 8 great disciples of Tirunandi. And his guru brother was Tirumular, who wrote the famous Tamil Saivite scripture, the Tirumantram, in which he praises Shiva as his Ishtadevata. Search where ye will, there be no deva like Saiva, none here below to equal him in glory. Lotus-like he of the gleaming matted locks, golden in splendor beyond the worlds apart. Tirumantram, verse 3. And of course, true to all Hindus and Saiva Hindus, he first gives an invocation to Ganapati, he who hath the 5 hands and the elephant face, whose tusk is even as the crescent moon, the son of Nandi, the flower of wisdom. Him I cherish in thought, his feet adored. Tirumular often used Nandi in place of Saiva, meaning one and the same thing. I'll wreathe him in garland, I'll hug him to heart, I'll sing him his name and dance with gift of flowers. Singing and dancing, seek thou Saiva, this alone I know, only too well I know. Verse 50. So it is clear that Tirumular, like Patanjali, they were totally immersed in Saiva Bhakta. Now Patanjali, he was also a Sanskrit grammatician, and he wrote a beautiful sloka to Nataraja, the Nataraja Shtotam. In the Yoga Sutras, Patanjali refers to Saiva as Ishvara. And remember, in the Hindu Yoga Dharma, there are only 3 Ishvaras and 3 Ishvaris, Brahma, Vishnu, and Saiva, Shiva. And their consorts, if you will, Saraswati, Lakshmi, and Parvati Ma, respectively. Patanjali also references the lingam, the Shiva lingam, and Pranava Om, associated with Ganapati. So it is abundantly clear that Patanjali was a Saiva Hindu guru. Now remember, there are many synonyms for what we call Hindu Dharma, Hinduism, the Hindu religion. Just Dharma is adequate, which Patanjali uses several times in the Yoga Sutras. Also, the first written word for the Dharma was Ritta, which Patanjali also uses. So simply because he does not use the word Hindu is no indication that Patanjali was not a Hindu guru. For example, in the Christian Bible, you don't find the words Christian religion, but everyone knows exactly what this is. And remember, 2,000 years ago, when Patanjali lived, there was nothing in his area but Hinduism, nothing to compare it to. And we'll see something very telling about that as we proceed. So, Patanjali wrote, among other things, a classic scripture called the Yoga Sutras. And first and foremost, one must recognize that the Yoga Sutras are considered one of the 6 orthodox systems of Hindu philosophy, the Shad Darshanas. And there's a connection here to Sanmukhanada, the 6th faith deity of Skanda or Murga, who is considered the inspiration behind all 6 of these classic Hindu philosophies, and they are meant to be studied, each one of them. And the Shadarshanas are considered smriti, or written text in which we know the authors, as opposed to shruti, such as the Vedas, in which we don't know the original authors. We have Nyaya by Gautama, Vaisesika by Kanada, Mimamsa by Jaimini, Vedanta sage Vasya, Sankhya sage Kapila, and of course the Yoga Darshana Patanjali. And if we look at these in a sense of order. We find Nyaya as logic, Vaisesika the objects of logic, Mimamsa, all-important rituals and why we do them, Vedanta, the end conclusion of the Vedas, the Upanishads. And remember, there's no end without a beginning. Sankhya, the science of enumeration, and the Yoga Darshana, putting it all into practice. And we'll clearly see that Patanjali obviously had a great knowledge of all the darshanas. So let's take a look at the Saiva Hindu Guru Patanjali's Yoga Sutras, and we'll try and highlight a few important points that one would assuredly never get in a so-called 200-hour certification course. In the Hindu Yoga Dharma, one must remember that in all aspects, whether it be art, music, dance, sculpture, the religious studies, the sadhanas, the tapas that the yogis go through, the training that the pundits and the pujaris and the swamis go through, takes decades upon decades of study and commitment before one ever attempts to teach. Of course, this flies in the face of the modern fast-paced world where one becomes an instant yogi or Ashtanga yogi in simply 200 hours of study. In the Yoga Sutras, Pada 1, Sutra 14, Saiva Hindu Guru Patanjali states, Dirgha Kala Nairantarya Satkara Savito. One must first have a true practice, Satkara Savito, and do this for a long time, Dirgha Kala, uninterrupted Nairantarya. And what does it mean in this area of Hinduism to study for a long time? Well, typically, one is a student, brahmacharini, for at least 12 years. And then at least 1 year or more of solitary seclusion in order to absorb the teachings before one ever would even think of teaching. Often the Hindu stories overemphasize to prove a point. For example, in Chandogya Upanishad, Indra studies for 101 years with Prajapati. So right off the bat, we can see how absolutely shallow is today's so-called certified yoga teacher and Ashtanga yoga teacher. And one has to remember that the Ashtanga portion of the Yoga Sutras is only about 23 sutras out of 196. What happened to the other 173? The Ashtanga portion comes at the end of the second pada and just the beginning of the third pada. What happened to the first pada, the first part of the second pada, the third pada, and the fourth pada? How could one ever expect to know what a book is all about by simply reading a short section of the middle? Now, darshana actually means insight. The Yoga Darshana. And as we will see, Patanjali's goal was to take his shishyas, his disciples, in and in and in, not into an outer world exploitation of these deep inner teachings. The Sanskrit Hindu word sutra, wherein we get the English word suture, means thread. So the composition of the Yoga Sutras are 196 simple aphorisms or threads in weaving a garment, and weaving is something that's very typical within the Hindu Yoga Dharma. Can we leave out any thread and expect to have any kind of a completed garment? Just focusing on a few sutras, the whole darshana begins to unravel. And the Yoga Sutras are organized into 4 padas or steps. Again, the analogy of learning something progressively, step by step by step, thread by thread by thread, in order to have a completed pilgrimage, if you will, to the Atmana, to have a completed spiritual garment, if you will. So who was the Saiva Hindu Guru Patanjali teaching? He was teaching young male Hindus in training to be in-depth yogis, to take them in and in. He was not training householders. He was not training people to be effective in the world. He was training yogis to go deep into the Atmana and beyond. And remember, there is no mention of any specific asana. Therefore, this flies totally in the face of today's so-called yoga that makes any reference to the Yoga Sutras, and especially the so-called Ashtanga Yoga, which is basically all about showing off the body and physical postures. Remember, we have texts about Hatha Yoga and the chakras and Kundalini. Patanjali barely mentions anything about the chakras. In these texts we've talked about in prior podcasts, and we have to remember that all of those texts which dealt with this area of Hatha Yoga, which is what is so blatantly misrepresented as yoga today, all said to keep the Hatha Yoga portion secret. Isn't it any wonder that Patanjali never wrote down anything about any specific Hatha Yoga asana? And remember, too, that these are short aphorisms with barely any explanation. So the intent was that one would learn from their guru, who would expound upon the meaning of each of these sutras. So even when some of the sutras are focused upon, obviously there's been a tremendous misinterpretation and great license to totally distort what Patanjali meant. We will actually see what he did say using the original Sanskrit. In a sense, the Yoga Darshana, Yoga Sutras, is metaphysical surgery, if you will. It was never meant to stand alone, but was a further study to one who has an in-depth beginning and orientation and commitment to the Hindu yoga dharma. This is clear in the very first sutra where Patanjali says, Atha Yoga Anusasana. Now he was going to explain the discipline of yoga. In the Sanskrit Hindu language, Atha means now, after. In English, we only have the one word, and we have to put it into context. But in Sanskrit, there are two words. Atha, now after. Aduna is now of immediacy. So in using atha, and remember Patanjali was a Sanskrit grammatician, he meant now after one is completely immersed in the Hindu yoga dharma. Now you're ready for this study. It's kind of like an analogy of a PhD program. Now you're ready to enter your PhD program, meaning after you have your master's, after you have your BA, after you have your high school education, you have your grade school education. So in the very first sutra, and this is clear as we go through the sutras, that one has to already have an in-depth knowledge of the Hindu yoga dharma to understand what the guru is saying. And indeed, Patanjali states a goal of chitta-vritta nirodha, calming the mind. For this first pada, samadhi pada, is really setting out the goal to be achieved. The second pada is sadhana pada, the actual practice, at the end of which we find the infamous Ashtanga Yoga of today. And the third pada is vibhuti pada, the powers that come from the disciplines, the sadhana. And this is very telling because vibhuti is the ash that the Saiva Hindus wear on their forehead, reminding us to burn up greed, anger, and lust, lobha, krodha, kama, and anava, karma, maya. Vibhuti is also the religious power that comes by living the Hindu yoga dharmic lifestyle. And then the fourth pada is Kaivalya, or liberation, and we'll see what Patanjali means by liberation. So what is the purpose of calming the mind, according to the Guru? In order that our awareness stays established in our true nature, tada drasta svarupe avastanam. And our true nature is the Atmana. This is the essence of the Hindu yoga dharma. Tattvam asi, that thou art. We are the Atmana. That is our true form, svarupa. And this is pretty much as far as the modern yogis will go. However, Patanjali states the obvious. When our mind is not in, or our awareness is not in the Atmana, it's going to go to other places. Where's that? Well, there are some ideal places where one's awareness should go. Pramana, viparyaya, vikalpa, nidra, smritihi. Pramana and parts of nidra and smriti are healthy places where our awareness should go. Viparyaya and vikalpa and some parts of nidra are not. And this is really important because the first place where our awareness should go, according to Patanjali, is in a standard, in a foundation, pramana. Here's where we look to the Nyaya philosophy, the logic of logic. Prataksha, Anumana, Upamana, Sabda. I know there's a lot here, but time does not permit to go through all of this in depth, but what Nyaya was stating was that in forming a logical conclusion, we use perception, inference, comparison, testimony. This is classic logic. Patanjali recognized this, however, he put a little different spin on it, and a healthy spin, a Saiva spin. His pramana was prataksha, anumana, he skipped upamana, he did not include sabdha, and incorporated agama. So what does this mean? That awareness should go into perception, prataksha, into inference, the afterthought, doing one's homework, so to speak, anumana. Upamana is comparison, and since there was nothing to compare the Yoga Sutras with, remember Patanjali was just surrounded by Hindu Dharma, he nixed this part of the equation, and sabdha means personal testimony to arrive at a conclusion, and what was important to him was the testimony of the Saiva Hindu scripture agama. So his foundation, when awareness is not in the Atmana, is to use perception, to use inference, afterthought, and to rely on the Saiva Hindu scriptures agama. This should be enough said right here. How could anyone go any further and purport to be teaching the Yoga Sutras and Astanga Yoga and not recognize this Hindu Saiva foundation? Viparyaya is definitely to be avoided. That's false knowledge. And vikalpa is very important because, again, Patanjali was very accurate with his word usage. And vikalpa actually means delusion. He said one enters into the deluded state when they take word knowledge that is devoid of fact. Wow. That's today's yoga. That's today's Astanga yoga. He said, Sabdayananupati vastu sunyo vikalpaha. Delusion vikalpa arises as anupati when we take word knowledge, sabdayana, that is devoid of fact, sunya. And remember, it was the Hindus invented the concept of the void or zero, sunya. Nidra is, of course, a state of sleep, and there can be good sleep, and there can be unhealthy sleep, and certainly avoiding sleep walking, if you will, being awake and yet not aware of what one is doing. And then smriti, real key in the Hindu Yoga Dharma, is developing a keen memory. That's why there is so much memorization work in the Hindu Yoga Dharma. And many things are just not written down. It's passed on orally. We see this today even with the music, which is not written down. People just learn to listen to each other and play. And that's why Patanjali says to his chelas, his shishyas, that they must intensely practice in Sutra 12, abhyasa, until it hurts. In Sutra 16, he makes reference to Saiva as the Param Purusha, the supreme soul. Then Patanjali is going to lay out two types of samadhi, with seed and without seed, samprajnata and asamprajnata. And this is basically a progressive step-by-step process into samadhi and the recognition of one who has some measure of samadhi or calm wisdom. And the first one is for basically all Hindus to strive and achieve vitarka, vichara, ananda, asmita. Reason, judgment, a purified sense of ego or self, and a purified sense of bliss, or what is true joy. Reason and judgment. Very interesting, since when many of the spurious yogis are encountered, they automatically repeat the cliche, do not judge. Well, Patanjali said judgment is an indication of one who has samadhi. Now, the second, more in-depth experience of samadhi is for those who are fully established in the Hindu yoga dharma. That's shraddha. Then they have a warrior spirit, virya. Then they have a profound memory, smriti. Then they enter into samadhi, and then he opens up the way to the teacher as prajna. For once one has samadhi, they must, in a sense, come down to the third eye point, prajna, and be able to teach others as Patanjali did. And Patanjali also gives the injunction to those who are very materialistically minded to not focus on their body in Sutra 19. Bhava pratyaya videha prakriti layanam, and enter into devotion. In Sutra 23 of Pada 1, he specifically mentions Ishvara pranidhana, which he will again mention. And Ishvara, again, remember, is Saiva, because in the next Sutra 24, he states this is a very specific Ishvara, Purusha Visesa. And we know that his life was dedicated to Saiva. In Sutra 30 of Pada 1, Patanjali lays out the nav viksepas, or the 9 distractions to the state of samadhi. And among these, again, he reiterates Bhranti Darshana, false knowledge, and Pramada, which is a lack of humility. Today's so-called yoga and Ashtanga yogis are full of false knowledge, and they don't suffer from an ego, that's for sure. In Sutra 48, Patanjali states, Ritambara Tatra Prajna, being established in the perception of Ritambara, Rita, Mother Nature, Bhume Mata, the first word for what we now call the Hindu Dharma. With this strong foundation, now his shishyas are led into the actual practices. Sadhana, what a beautiful word. Abiding in giving, sadhana. Sadhana are Hindu religious practices. And it's in here that we'll find at the end of the second pada, the Ashtanga portion. But in Sutra 1, he succinctly defines what is most important in the practice of yoga. 3 things. Tapaha, svadhyaya, ishvara pranidhana, kriya yogaha. Remember, kriya is the Tamil term for devotion. Devotion was extremely important to Patanjali, as he was a Saiva Hindu. And we'll define tapas and svadhyaya, but remember that svadhyaya is about finding one's Ishtadevata, which is a Hindu deity. And then Ishvara Pranidhana, again, having full devotion to Saiva. So succinctly, these were the highlights of sadhana to Patanjali. Do your tapas, do your self-study to connect to a Hindu deity, and have great devotion to Saiva because he was a Saiva Hindu. A Vaishnava guru would have said, have great devotion to Vishnu. And actually in the Mimamsa Darshana, Jaimini says the exact same thing to conquer the mind. Tapaha svadhyaya ishvara pranidhana. Then in Sutra 3, Patanjali lays out the klesas, the afflictions, avidya, smita, raga, devesha, benevesa, ignorance, egoism, extreme likes and dislikes, and an over-attachment to the world. And of these afflictions, Patanjali emphasizes that avidya, ignorance, is the mother of all klesas. Avidya kestram uttaresam. In Sutra 19 of Pada 2, Patanjali mentions the lingam. And then we finally come to the Astanga portion beginning around Sutra 29. And this is the infamous portion of the Yoga Sutras that has been totally distorted beyond recognition. And again, remember that this is not about Hatha Yoga asanas. An honest read of the Astanga portion, indeed the entirety of the Yoga Sutras, clearly shows that this is about going deeper and deeper within, not going out, not becoming a yoga teacher, not developing studios and all the yoga products that are so prevalent today in this spurious yoga stuff. And again, remember that Patanjali is simply codifying what already exists within the Hindu yoga, religious, spiritual, scientific lifestyle. There are many codes of conduct. He developed his yamas and niyamas from the existing Hindu dharma. And today we also have a modern code of the yamas and the niyamas, if you will, or a less strenuous code. Even for the Hindus, because the yamas and niyamas of Patanjali, in an honest read, are clearly meant only for male Hindu, Saivite, celibate yogis in training. Ahimsa, nonviolence. Pretty straightforward. Satya pratishtayam tatsam nidao vairatyagaha. That's ahimsa. Satya pratishtayam kriya pala shreyatvam. When one is established in truth, all of one's actions bear fruit. Again, totally contrary to today's so-called yoga. Asteya pratishtayam sarva ratno pastanam. When one is established in non-stealing, all treasures come. In other words, we will get what we need, not necessarily what we want. Now, here we go. Brahmacharya pratishtayam virya labhyaha. When one is established in celibacy, they gain manliness. Virya means a male warrior. Brahmacharya is celibacy. Aparigraha staire janma kathamta sambodaha. Very interesting one. When one is established in non-receiving, wow, the total antithesis of what is today's so-called yoga business stuff. He's taking his shishya so deep within, they're not even receiving their own bodies. They're going so deep within that they actually remember their past lives. Parigrahastaire janma kathamta sambodaha. Then his 5 niyamas, saucha, svanga, jigupsa, paraira, samsargaha. This one is quite amazing. A little bit shocking for most people. For the Saiva Hindu Guru Patanjali says that to develop purity, one must become disgusted not only with the bodies of others, but also one's own body. In other words, he's forcing them to go so deep within that the body itself is an impediment, even disgusting, jugupsa. Now, this is one of the only times when Patanjali has to add a clarifying sutra, because this is a bit shocking to most. And again, we see the intent of taking his shishyas so deep within, because he clarifies the meaning of this by saying, Saumanasya ekagrindriya jai atma darshana. Then one realizes their atmana and attains a cheerful state of mind. This is the true yogi and yogini, the true renunciate who has left the world. This is not for the average Hindu, much less the non-Hindu. These are those who have completely abandoned material life and go so deep within, they even abandon their own physical body to realize their true nature as the Atmana. Then one will find contentment, santosha, santoshima. Santosha anuttamaha sukha labhyaha. Then one must continue in their strenuous efforts or tapas. And tapas is much more profound than simply sadhana. Sadhana are Hindu daily rituals that one does. Tapas are extreme disciplines, like 3 or 4 day fasts, very little sleep. And if one is interested in the Hatha Yoga text, one should read those and see how intense the discipline is for the Hatha Yogi. Svatmarama, for example, lays out how the yogi must live for at least 1 year in a solitary environment, getting up at 4 a.m., practicing all day until midnight, and then repeating. Now we come to the Niyama Svadhyaya, self-study. And often this is in the phony yoga movement, they just simply say study. But Patanjali gives a purpose to the study. Samprayogaha ishta devata svadhyaya. The whole purpose of Patanjali as the guru is to have his shishya connect samprayogaha to a Hindu deity. Now remember, he was a Saiva Hindu, but every Hindu may have a deity that they're more attracted to within Hinduism. Ganesha, Kartikeya, maybe Krishna, to connect to one's Ishta Devata. And this does not mean Jesus. It doesn't mean deities from other religions as some make it out to be. It's a Hindu spirit being. And then again, as a Saiva Hindu guru teaching Saivite chelas, shishyas, he says again, Ishvara pranidana iva samadhi. Great devotion to Siva will lead to the state of samadhi. Then the third limb, yama niyama asana, Patanjali simply says sthira sukham asana. Just find one steady, comfortable posture. There's no such thing as what's passed off as Ashtanga yoga today, because the intent is to go deep within. The purpose of this one steady, comfortable posture, prayatna saitalianta samapatibhyam, to go into the infinite, the absolute, ananta. Tato dvandava anibhagataha, thereby transcending duality. Not entering into duality, transcending duality. Now one systematically enters into the fourth step, pranayama, the science of breath control, in order to do what? To have a healthier, more athletic body? Well, that may be a side benefit, but it's to prakash avaranam, to unveil the inner light. Then one moves into the internal energies in pratyahara, where one detaches from the outer, asamprayoga chittasya. And here's where Patanjali ends this second pada, sadhana pada, and saves the last 3 limbs of yoga for the third pada, vibhuti pada. Remember vibhuti, the holy ash that Saiva Hindus wear, the powers obtained, and the power to enter into dharana, dhyana, and samadhi, in-depth contemplation, absorption, and the calm wisdom. Now one is going deep, like a funnel, going deeper and deeper into a singular point. Desabandhas chittasya dharana. This state of contemplation, often mislabeled meditation, is not about expanding the mind at this point. It's about limiting the field of the mind, total focus. That's why Hindus wear the bindi, the red dot, the target, if you will. Then one becomes absorbed, dhyana, in this one continual dance of inner experience, ekatanata. Then comes the experiences, the ongoing experiences of samadhi, nirbasa sunyam, iva samadhi, where one even goes beyond light, into the no-thangness, not becoming something. Years ago, a yogi from Sri Lanka, when he first heard about the book by Paramahansa Yogananda, Autobiography of a Yogi, he could not keep from laughing. He said, "How ridiculous. A yogi is a nobody." But who wants to be a nobody in today's fast-paced yoga world that is permeated by picture, personality, and price tag, and individuals putting their name on yoga? Then in Sutra 14, Patanjali talks about the dharma arising from the substratum, dharmanupati, dharmi. And again, Patanjali does not go into in-depth explanations of the chakras. He does talk about Nabhi chakra in Sutra 30, which is Manipura, very important, using one's willpower. And the Kantakupe, which is actually the Visuddha chakra in Sutra 31, using our willpower for purification, which is what it's all about. As he now takes the Shishya into the fourth pada of Kaivalya, or liberation, liberating oneself from the many births, liberating oneself from the material world, and going so deep within that they become nothing. In Sutra 12, he emphasizes holding on to the religious laws of the Dharma, Dharmanam, in order to accomplish this. And again, he repeats the Dharma in Sutra 20. Then finally, he exclaims in the last two sutras, 33 and 34, that the yogi has now fulfilled their destiny of evolution and enters into the Purush Artha Sunyam, the wealth of the no-thangness of the soul. As the Saiva Hindu Guru Patanjali's Guru brother Tirumular stated in his famous Tirumantram, Tantra 8, verse 2587, even as shadow disappears with body, even as bubble returneth into water, even as flame of camphor leaves traces none, so it is when Jiva into Param uniteth. I know this has been difficult for those into today's so-called yoga, and especially those who thought they were involved in Ashtanga yoga. But clearly Patanjali, his Guru brothers, and all devout Hindus, and in this case the Saiva Hindus, they were totally sure of what they were doing. This was a lifetime commitment and effort. Again, as his Guru brother Tirumular said in Tantra 5, verse 1545, this the right path, that the right path. Be thou not tossed in such frail human doubts. Seek thou the being that is beyond wilderness of doubts. His is the form that transcends fleshy imperfections. So hopefully this has been, I know, a little bit difficult, but an inspiration, hopefully, to those who really want to pursue deeper the Hindu yoga dharma and respecting what it truly means to be a yogi or a yogini. We wish you all the best, but we will be here to stand up for the dharma and for those like Patanjali who are not around to speak up for themselves. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. So once again, let's have a healthy Hindu yoga tree vrikshasana and fix these 8 broken limbs.